Miss Maya Calloway has been executed. It's my fault.
There is a kind of guilt that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with sirens or courtrooms or handcuffs. It arrives quietly, in the space between sleeping and waking, in the half-second before your eyes open each morning when, for just one moment, you forget what you have done. And then you remember, and the weight of it settles back onto your chest like a stone that has learned the exact shape of you. This is the story of a woman named Leah Calloway. It is a story about a crime, about a courtroom, about a firing squad, and about a coffin that held the wrong woman. But more than any of that, it is the story of what happens to a soul that chooses silence when the truth could have saved someone's life, and what it takes to rebuild a life from the wreckage of that choice. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you are watching from. We would love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Leah and Maya Calloway were born on a Tuesday morning in September 1979 in a small town outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, 4 minutes apart, into a family that had very little money and an enormous amount of love. Their mother, Doris Calloway, was a seamstress who worked out of the back bedroom of their house on Sycamore Lane, hemming wedding dresses and taking in alterations for the ladies at the church 3 blocks away. Their father, Gene Calloway, drove a delivery truck for a regional grocery chain and came home every evening at the same time, smelling of diesel fuel and peppermint candy. By every account, it was not a remarkable childhood. It was not a childhood of vacations or new clothes or weekend trips to theme parks. But it was warm and it was steady, and for 2 little girls growing up in the same worn house with the same chipped dinner plates, it was enough. People who knew the twins as children almost always said the same thing when they were asked to describe them. They said Maya was the one who looked you straight in the eye. She had a stillness about her, even as a little girl, the kind of child who listened to adults the way most children never do, who seemed to be taking in more than she let on, storing it somewhere deep and careful inside herself. Her second-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, later told a reporter that Maya Calloway was the kind of student a teacher remembers for the rest of her career. Not because she was the loudest or the brightest, but because she was the most present. She paid attention the way other people breathe, like it cost her nothing and meant everything. Leah was different, not in a way that anyone would have called dangerous, not back then, just different the way a flame is different from a lamp. Both give light. One is harder to hold. Leah was restless and quick and funny in a way that made adults nervous and children absolutely devoted to her. She had a laugh that filled a room from one end to the other and an appetite for trouble that was never quite mean-spirited but always expensive. She got into fights she didn't start and talked her way out of punishments she deserved. She borrowed things she never returned and made you feel like it was your idea. And through all of it, through every detention and every phone call home and every grounded weekend, Maya was right there beside her, covering for her, excusing her, loving her with the kind of steady, unconditional love that only a twin can understand. Their mother used to say that God sent them in pairs because neither one of them could have survived the world alone. Doris meant it as a compliment to both of them. She could not have known, back then, how true it would turn out to be, or how horribly that truth would one day be tested. By the time the Calloway twins were in their late 20s, the distance between their lives had become something that people whispered about. Maya had done exactly what everyone who knew her expected her to do. She had worked hard, stayed quiet, and built something real. She had trained as a licensed practical nurse at the community college in Knoxville, gotten a job at a rehabilitation center on the east side of town, and spent her days caring for elderly patients who had no one else to sit with them. She had a small apartment, a reliable car, and a man named Thomas Webb who loved her with the kind of steadiness that matched her own. They were engaged by the summer of 2008. The wedding was set for the following spring. Leah's life, by that same summer, looked nothing like her sister. She had moved 4 times in 3 years, first to Nashville, then to Atlanta, then back to Knoxville, then to a suburb of Memphis where she had taken up with a man named Derek Sims. Derek was the kind of man that women with better luck would have spotted from a distance and walked the other way. He was charming and broke in equal measure, and he had a way of making problems feel like adventures and adventures feel like love. Lee had known him for 8 months before she moved in with him. She had known him for 11 months before she understood what he actually did for money. And she had known him for 13 months before the night that changed everything for her, for Derek, for a man named Curtis Hale, and most of all, for Maya. Curtis Hale was 34 years old when he died. He had grown up in the same part of Memphis where Lee and Derek were living, and he and Derek had a history that went back years. A tangled mess of money owed and favors unpaid and old scores that had never quite been settled. On the evening of October 9th, 2008, Curtis came to the apartment where Lee and Derek lived. The argument that followed was loud enough that the neighbor 2 units down later told investigators she had turned up her television to drown it out. What happened after that is something that only 2 people ever knew completely, and one of them is dead. What the evidence showed, and what investigators would later piece together, was that Curtis Hale was shot twice at close range inside that apartment. Derek Sims was gone before the police arrived, and Leah Calloway was standing in the kitchen with blood on her hands and a gun on the counter, and a mind that was running so fast in so many directions that she could not think clearly about a single one of them. She did not call 911. She called Maya. It was 11:17 at night when Maya's phone rang. She had been asleep for less than an hour. She would later describe that phone call as the most frightening thing she had ever experienced, not because of what Lee said, but because of how she said it. Lee's voice, which had always been the loudest thing in any room, was barely above a whisper. She said, "Maya, I need you. I need you to come right now." And Maya, because Maya always came, got up, got dressed, and drove across town without asking a single question. She would spend the rest of her life, what little of it remained, wishing she had asked just one. When Maya arrived at the apartment, she found her sister sitting on the kitchen floor, rocking slightly, the way a person rocks when their body is trying to absorb something that their mind has not yet accepted. Curtis Hale was on the floor a few feet away, and there was no longer any question of what had happened to him. Maya knelt down next to her sister and held her face in her hands and said, "Lee, look at me." And Lee looked at her. And the thing that passed between them in that moment, the wordless negotiation of 2 people who had spent their entire lives reading each other's silences, would cost one of them everything. Maya touched the gun. She moved it without thinking, the way you move a thing that is wrong and out of place and frightening. She touched the counter. She touched the walls. She was in that apartment for less than 20 minutes. When the lights of a patrol car swept across the front window, Lee grabbed her sister's arm and pulled her toward the back door. But Maya did not run. She was not built for running. She told Lee to go, and Lee went, and Maya stayed. And when the officers came through the front door and found a woman standing in a kitchen with a dead man on the floor, the story had already been written, whether Maya understood that yet or not. The investigation that followed was swift and from the outside appeared thorough. Maya told the truth at every stage of it. She told the officers she had not been there when it happened. She told them she had come to help her sister. She told them she did not know what had occurred. All of it was the truth. None of it saved her. The problem was not that investigators ignored the evidence. The problem was that the evidence they had pointed directly at Maya. Her fingerprints were on the counter. Her fingerprints were on the wall near the door. And most damaging of all, her fingerprints were on the gun, because she had moved it without thinking, in a moment of pure panicked instinct, before she understood what she was standing in the middle of. There was also the matter of the neighbor's account. The neighbor who had turned up her television to drown out the argument reported seeing a woman leaving the building just before the patrol car arrived. She described the woman as having dark hair, medium height, slender build. She said the woman moved quickly and deliberately, like someone who knew exactly where she was going. She picked Maya's photograph out of a lineup. She was absolutely certain. She was also looking at a photograph of a woman who shared a face with the one she had actually seen, and she had no way of knowing that. Lee did not come forward. Not during the investigation. Not during the arraignment. Not during the weeks leading up to the trial when Maya's public defender, a man named Robert Ellis, who was carrying 42 active cases at the time and had precisely 11 days to prepare Maya's defense, was struggling to build something out of almost nothing. Lee watched from a safe distance and told herself that the evidence was circumstantial, that the jury would see through it, that Maya would be fine. She told herself these things the way a person tells themselves things when the alternative is too heavy to carry. The trial of Maya Calloway began on a Monday morning in March of 2009 and lasted 9 days. The courtroom in Shelby County was not a large one, but it was full every day, not with reporters or cameras, but with quiet people who had known Curtis Hale, and with Maya's parents, Jean and Doris, who sat in the same 2 seats in the second row every morning. Jean with his hands folded on his knees and Doris with a small Bible that she held but never opened, as though the weight of it was comfort enough. Thomas Webb, Maya's fiancé, was there every day as well. He sat 2 rows behind the Calloways, and he did not speak to reporters, and he did not look away from Maya, not once, not for the entire 9 days. Lee was there too. She sat in the back row, wearing sunglasses indoors. She told herself she was there to make sure Maya was all right. She told herself she was there because she loved her sister. She did not allow herself to name the real reason she was there, which was that she could not stay away, that watching the consequences of her silence play out in real time was somehow less terrible than sitting alone somewhere and imagining it. The prosecution's case was built on 3 things: the fingerprint evidence, the neighbor's eyewitness testimony, and the absence of any credible alternative narrative. Robert Ellis, Maya's attorney, raised questions about the reliability of eyewitness identification. He pointed out that the neighbor had seen the woman for only a few seconds and under poor lighting. He challenged the fingerprint evidence on the grounds that it proved presence but not participation. None of it landed the way it needed to. The jury, 12 men and women who had sat for 9 days and heard everything the state had to offer and very little that the defense could provide, deliberated for 6 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. The judge, reading from a prepared statement that he had clearly written before the verdict came in, sentenced Maya Calloway to death by firing squad, in accordance with Tennessee state law. Doris Calloway collapsed in the second row. Jean caught her before she hit the floor. Thomas Webb stood up, and then sat back down, and then stood up again, as though his body could not decide what to do with itself. And Lee, in the back row, behind her sunglasses, did not move at all. Before we go any further, we want to pause here for just a moment and ask you something. Wherever you are right now, whether you are in your living room or your car or lying in bed watching this before you fall asleep, we want you to think about what you just heard. Think about Maya, sitting at that defense table, knowing the truth and knowing that the one person who could confirm it had chosen silence. Think about what that feels like. And then think about Lee in the back row, behind her sunglasses, watching it happen. If you have thoughts about this, if you want to weigh in, leave a comment below. We read every single one. And if you are new here and this story is already getting under your skin the way we think it is, hit that subscribe button right now, because you do not want to miss the second half of this. Maya spent the next 4 years on death row at the Tennessee prison for women in Nashville. She was housed in a unit with 12 other women, all of them convicted of crimes that ranged from drug distribution to premeditated murder. By all accounts, she adapted to incarceration the way she had adapted to everything in her life, with quiet, deliberate endurance. She made no enemies. She made no demands. She worked in the prison library 4 days a week, shelving books and helping other inmates with reading difficulties, and she wrote letters to Thomas Webb every Sunday without fail, even after he stopped writing back, which he did, gently, with a letter full of apology and grief, about 8 months into her sentence. Her parents visited every month. Jean and Doris would drive the 3 hours from Knoxville to Nashville in their aging Buick, arriving before visiting hours opened, sitting in the parking lot with coffee from a gas station, and very little to say to each other because there was nothing to say that didn't circle back to the same terrible center. They would spend their 2 hours with Maya talking about small things, the church, the neighbors, the price of groceries, and they would drive home in the same silence they had arrived in. Doris later said that the drive home was the hardest part. She said it was the worst 2.5 hours of every month of her life, and she endured it 37 times before Maya's execution date was set. Lee visited twice in 4 years. The first time was 8 months after the conviction, and it went badly. Maya sat across from her sister in the visitation room and did not raise her voice and did not cry and did not say anything that could be called an accusation. She simply looked at Lee with those steady eyes that had always seen more than they let on, and she said, "I need to understand why." And Lee, who had spent 8 months building a wall of rationalization thick enough to live behind, felt it crack from top to bottom in the space of that single question. She left before the hour was up. She did not come back for another 18 months. The second visit was worse than the first, because by then they both knew there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said by the silence between them. The execution date was set for the 14th of November, 2013. Maya was 34 years old. She had been on death row for 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. In the weeks leading up to the execution, there was a small and determined effort by a group of advocates, led largely by a law professor at Vanderbilt named Dr. Caroline Marsh, who had read about the case in a legal journal and become convinced that something in the forensic evidence had been mishandled, to file a last-minute appeal based on new questions about the reliability of the fingerprint analysis. The appeal was denied. A petition for clemency, signed by more than 4,000 people, was submitted to the governor's office. It received a form letter in response. Thomas Webb gave one interview during this period to a local newspaper reporter who tracked him down at his workplace. He said only this: "Maya Calloway is not the woman who killed Curtis Hale. I know that. I have always known that. And I will know it until the day I die." Then he went back inside and did not speak publicly about Maya again for a very long time. On the evening of November 13th, Maya was given the opportunity to make a final statement. She asked to speak to her parents privately, which was granted. What was said in that room has never been made public, because Jean and Doris Calloway have never spoken about it and have asked repeatedly to be left alone on that subject, and they deserve that request to be honored. What is known is that when the guards came to take Maya back to her cell that evening, she was calm. Not the forced calm of someone holding themselves together by force of will, but the deeper calm of someone who has accepted something that they cannot change and found a way to carry it with a kind of terrible peace. Lee was in a motel room in Chattanooga that night. She had driven there without a clear reason, without a destination in mind, the way a person drives when they cannot stay still and cannot face where they are. She had a bottle of bourbon on the nightstand and the television on and the volume low. She did not sleep. At some point in the early hours of the morning, she felt something she would later struggle to describe to anyone who asked. She said it was not a sound and not a sight and not a dream. She said it was more like a pressure, the sudden, sourceless sensation of something closing. A door, she said, like a door closing somewhere inside her chest. She sat up in the motel bed and looked at the clock. It was 6:14 in the morning. Maya Calloway had been executed by firing squad at 6:02 a.m. The months that followed Maya's death were the worst of Lee Calloway's life, and she has never claimed otherwise. She left the Memphis suburb where she had been living. Derek Sims had been gone for years by then, having disappeared into a different state and a different set of problems the week after the shooting, and she moved back to Knoxville, into a rented room in a house on the other side of town from her parents. She could not face Jean and Doris. She understood, in a way that was new and total and devastating, that she had not only let her sister die, she had taken their daughter from them. And that was a debt she had no idea how to begin to repay. She started drinking heavily, not dramatically, not in a way that made the news or landed her in a hospital, but steadily, quietly, the way a building deteriorates when the maintenance stops. She worked odd jobs, mostly waitressing, and she spent her evenings in a particular kind of numb that she was deliberately constructing, because the alternative to numb was a pain that she did not believe she could survive. She stopped looking in mirrors. Not as a figure of speech. She literally covered the mirror in her room with a piece of cloth and stopped looking at her own reflection, because every time she caught a glimpse of her own face, she saw the face that had been in that courtroom, the face that had been led to a wall, the face that had looked at the world for the last time without knowing how much of its story was still untold. She went on this way for almost 2 years, and then, on a Wednesday afternoon in August of 2015, something happened that was small in the way that things which change everything are sometimes small. Lee was driving back from a shift at the diner where she worked, and she was pulled over for running a red light that she had not even seen. The officer ran her license. There was a database error. a clerical mistake in the state record system that linked Lee's identification number to Maya's case file. For approximately 45 seconds, the officer's screen showed an alert flagging the driver for a case associated with a woman who had been executed 2 years earlier. The officer looked at Lee's face. He looked at his screen. He looked at Lee's face again. And he said, "Ma'am, this is going to sound strange, but this system is showing me a name attached to your ID that I need to verify." Lee did not know, in that moment, what the screen said, but she saw the officer's expression, the confusion, the double take, the slight frown of a man trying to reconcile two things that did not fit together, and something in her understood. Something in her recognized, on a level that had nothing to do with logic, that she was looking at a reflection of exactly what she had done to her sister. She had been mistaken for a dead woman, just as the neighbor had mistaken a living one. The officer sorted out the database error within a few minutes. He issued her a citation for the red light and let her go. Lee drove 2 blocks, pulled into a church parking lot, and sat behind the wheel for 1 hour and 40 minutes, staring at nothing. When she got out of the car, she went inside. She had not been inside a church since her sister's funeral. She sat in the back pew, not because she was praying and not because she believed in anything in particular, but because she had run out of other places to sit. A pastor named Reverend David Aucaffer found her there 40 minutes later when he came in to prepare for an evening service. He sat down next to her without asking any questions. After a long silence, Lee began to talk. She talked for 3 hours. Reverend Aucaffer has said since then that in 22 years of ministry, he has had many conversations with people carrying heavy things, but that what Leah Calloway said to him that evening in the back pew of his church was something he was not fully prepared for. He has said he does not believe it is his place to describe what she said, because the details belong to Lee. What he has said publicly is this: "I have never seen a person more completely broken, and I have never seen a person more completely ready." He said she did not ask for absolution. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not ask for anything except to say it out loud. To have it exist in the air between 2 people, named and real and no longer locked away in the place she had been keeping it. After that evening, Lee began seeing a counselor, a woman named Dr. Patricia Reeves, who worked out of a small office near the university. She started attending a weekly support group for people dealing with grief and shame and moral injury, a term that Dr. Reeves introduced her to, that Lee has said in the years since, was the first language she had ever found that came close to describing what she was living with: moral injury. The damage done to a person's sense of right and wrong when they have participated in or witnessed or failed to prevent something that violates their core understanding of who they are. Not guilt exactly, though guilt was part of it. Not shame exactly, though shame was part of it too. Something deeper than both. Something that lives in the place where a person's identity used to be stable. She went to see Jean and Doris Calloway in the spring of 2016. She did not call ahead. She drove to Sycamore Lane and knocked on the front door of the house where she and Maya had grown up, the house with the chipped dinner plates and the back bedroom where their mother used to sew. And when Doris opened the door and saw her daughter's face looking back at her, the face that was also her other daughter's face, the face she had last seen through a thick pane of glass on death row, she did not say a word. She simply stepped aside, and Lee walked in, and for the first time in 8 years, the 3 of them sat in the same room and told the truth. In the fall of 2016, Leah Calloway contacted the Shelby County District Attorney's Office and gave a full, voluntary statement. She described in detail what had happened on the night of October 9th, 2008. She told them about Derek Sims. She told them about the argument. She told them what she had done and what she had not done and what she had allowed to happen in the years that followed. She told them about Maya's phone call and Maya's arrival and Maya's fingerprints on a gun that Maya had never fired. She told them everything, all of it, out loud, in a room with a recording device and a prosecutor who listened without expression and took 17 pages of notes. The legal outcome was complicated, as legal outcomes in cases like this often are. The statute of limitations had expired on certain charges. Derek Sims, who was the primary perpetrator, had died in 2014 in an unrelated incident in another state. The case against Lee herself was reviewed by a team of prosecutors who ultimately determined that the charges available were limited and that prosecution would serve little practical purpose given the circumstances. Lee was not imprisoned. The law, as constructed, had run out of options. It could not reach back far enough or forward far enough to do the thing that most people who heard the story felt needed to be done. What the law could do was this. It could formally re-examine Maya Calloway's conviction in light of the new testimony. It could acknowledge, in the language of official record, that Maya Calloway had been convicted on the basis of misidentified fingerprint evidence and mistaken eyewitness testimony in a crime she had not committed. In December of 2016, a judge in Shelby County granted a posthumous review of Maya's case. In the spring of 2017, nearly 4 years after Maya's execution, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals issued a formal finding that Maya Calloway's conviction had been a miscarriage of justice. It did not bring her back. It did not restore the 4 years she had spent on death row or the 34 years she had lived before them. But it put the truth into the record, where it had always belonged, and where it would now remain. Thomas Webb read about the court's finding in an online news article. He was living in Nashville by then, working as an accountant, and he had not spoken publicly about Maya in years. He called Jean Calloway that same evening. The conversation lasted for a long time. Neither man has described what was said. Thomas has since said only that he is glad the record reflects the truth, and that he thinks about Maya every day, and that she deserved better from every institution and every person, himself included. He said, because he had stopped writing that had failed to protect her. Lee has been asked, many times since she came forward, whether she feels better, whether the confession helped, whether the foundation she established in Maya's name, a small organization that provides legal support for low-income defendants in capital cases in Tennessee, gives her any sense of peace. She answers this question the same way every time. She says that she does not experience what she is doing as healing. She says she does not think she is entitled to healing, and she is not sure she wants it, because she is afraid that if she heals, she will stop paying attention in the way she needs to keep paying attention. She says what she experiences is accountability. The ongoing, daily, unrelenting practice of being responsible for what she caused. She visits women on death row in Tennessee twice a year. She speaks to community groups. She does not tell her story to seek sympathy. She tells it because she believes that the truth, told out loud and told completely, is the only thing she has left to offer Maya. She has said, in an interview given to a journalist who spent 3 months documenting her story, that the hardest part is not the guilt. She said the hardest part is the face. Every morning, when she finally stopped covering the mirror, she saw her sister looking back at her. Not as a haunting, not in any mystical sense, but simply because they shared a face, and the face had not changed, and the face would never change. And every day for the rest of her life, she would wake up looking like the woman who had died in her place. She said, I did not earn this face. I did not earn any of the days I have had since November 14th, 2013. So I try to make the days worth something, not for me, for her. There is something about this story that the statistics alone cannot hold. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, more than 190 people in the United States have been exonerated from death row since 1973, people who were convicted, sentenced to die, and later found to be innocent. Most of them were fortunate enough to be found innocent before the execution was carried out. Maya Calloway was not one of them. Her case sits in a smaller, grimmer category, the category of cases where the truth arrived too late to matter in any way that could restore what had been taken. And the reason it arrived too late was not a failure of the justice system, though the justice system failed her in multiple ways. The reason it arrived too late was a choice. One choice, made by one person, in the back of a courtroom, behind a pair of sunglasses, on a March morning in 2009. We tell this story not to condemn Lee Calloway, who has spent the years since her confession doing everything within her power to honor what her silence cost. We tell it because it is true, and because the truth of it contains something important about the nature of justice, about the gap between what the law can do and what justice actually requires. The law could not punish Lee in the way that many people believe she deserved. The law ran out of reach. But Lee did not wait for the law. She came forward anyway, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, because she had finally understood that the only way to carry what she had done was to stop carrying it alone. She gave Maya back her name. She could not give her back her life, but she gave her the truth, in the official record, in permanent ink, where it will remain long after everyone who knew either of these women is gone. Maya Calloway was innocent. She died on a Tuesday morning in November of 2013 at the age of 34, for a crime she had nothing to do with, because the one person who could have saved her chose silence. And Leah Calloway has been paying for that silence ever since, not in a prison cell, but in a life that she has deliberately made into a monument to the sister she failed. Whether that is justice is a question that each person who hears this story has to answer for themselves. We have our own thoughts, but we think the more important question, the one that matters beyond this story, beyond Lee, beyond Maya, beyond the courtroom in Shelby County, is the one we want to leave you with tonight. If you had known the truth, what would you have done? And at what point does silence become a crime of its own? Leave your answer in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from. We read every single word. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something that you want to hold on to, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the next story we are bringing you is just as heavy, just as real, and just as impossible to look away from. We will see you there.